everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Christina and today is Spooky Stories Sunday. So Spooky Stories Sunday is my mini series that I'm doing right now for spooky season where I sit down, I do my makeup, and I tell you guys a spooky story, as the name suggests. Like I said, this is a mini series, so for right now the plan is I want to be doing this every Sunday until the weekend of Halloween. And then maybe I'll continue something kind of like this going forward, but this is just kind of for me. Halloween was canceled this year, as was all things this year, so I just wanted something spooky on the channel that brought me some sort of joy. I also frequently like falling down research rabbit holes, so this was also good for me because I get to do that frequently and not feel bad about it. And today was no exception. I have been researching this for a few days now and it's really interesting. I have also attempted to film this multiple times at this point because I'm not very coherent with storytelling yet. So hopefully today's storytelling is better and I actually get the point across. So before I jump into today's story, definitely make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more from me, because like I said, I do these every Sunday, at least during spooky season. And if you like these, I wouldn't want you to miss them, so make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification as well, and let's get into this. So like I mentioned, I do my makeup while I tell you guys these stories. If you are interested in any, where are my hair clips? If you are interested in any of the makeup that I'm using, they will be listed down in the description, but otherwise, I will not be talking about it. Also, I will have all of my resources that I used also down in the description. So today's story is actually the story that inspired a good many movies, and actually pretty popular movies. I think they're popular. Okay, I'm not very well versed in horror movies, but this story did lead to the inspiration for a few movies. Movies like An American Haunting and The Blair Witch Project. I also saw some claims that this inspired The Sixth Sense, but I've seen a lot of these stories that say that they inspired The Sixth Sense, so I'm not so sure about that one. This also did have a movie named after the actual story. So there is a movie called The Bell Witch Haunting, which I think came out in like 2013. Didn't hear anything about it, so I'm not sure it's very good, but it is based off of this story. And unlike last week's video, last week we talked about the Dudleytown Curse. Unlike that video, where I couldn't find any information that actually like proved or disproved anything, this story, while not maybe being proof, there's a lot more of a written trail of what happened in this story, which I think is really interesting because there were books written at the time. There are like first-hand accounts that were written at the time, and it just seems a lot more history rich. Kind of makes the story more fun, in my opinion. So the story that we're talking about today is based around the Bell family, namely a man named John Bell. The year is 1804. And if you aren't familiar with American history, some things were happening in 1804 that are either not relevant, not really relevant, but I do find it interesting. 1804 is the year after the Louisiana Purchase, so that was the year after our country grew exponentially. Whether it was unconstitutional or not is still the debate, but that did happen. Also at the end of 1803 into 1804, the last state in the North abolished slavery. So it was New Jersey was the last state in the North, which does mean, obviously this is before the Civil War, so that does mean that slavery is still a enterprise. That's what we frequently see it called in the South. The only reason I'm bringing that up is because John did own slaves. I did see some articles completely miss that point, but I want to bring it up because it will be relevant later on. So like I mentioned, this story takes place in 1804 with a man named John Bell. Him and his wife Lucy in 1804 decide to move with their 9 children. Could you imagine having 9 kids? Good Lord. They moved with their 9 children from North Carolina to Tennessee. They also took a family of slaves with them. From what I learned about John and Lucy, Lucy actually came from a pretty wealthy background in regards to her family owned a lot of land. And when her and John got married, he inherited a bunch of her father's land, and that's how they started their wealth. So they were pretty well off already at this point before even moving to Tennessee. When they get to Tennessee, they buy a ton of land. I'm not entirely sure how much land they bought at first. The farm in North Carolina had 100 acres and at least 100 acres starting out in Tennessee, but eventually John's wealth does grow to over 328 acres is what I saw. I did see some articles say that he had 1,000 acres, but most consistently I saw like 320 to 350 acres. of land, which is so much land. So obviously with that much land, it's farmland, and it seems like John and the family were doing really well at first. They were growing crops, everything was really successful. They became really respected in their community. They ended up joining a church in the local area. Oh, I didn't say where they were in Tennessee. So in Tennessee, they moved to this place. I think originally it was called, what was it called originally? They moved to a place originally called Robertson County. It's now known as Adams County. So from what I could see on the map, it's about an hour away from Nashville, and it's still there today. Adams County still exists. But when they get there, they join a church. John eventually becomes a deacon at this church. They're well respected, involved in their communities. They have lots of money in comparison to lots of people. So overall, doing really, really well. So in the first few years that they live in Adams County or Robertson County, they do have more children, as you do. They do have 3 more children. They have a girl in 1806 named Betsy, and then they have a boy born in 1811 and another boy born in 1813. I'll put their names up on the screen because I cannot remember them right now. But Betsy is really the only one that's really prevalent throughout the story. So Betsy, I remember, she was born in 1806. So they have 3 more kids in the first few years that they are there, and everything's going really well, like I said, for 13 years at least. Like, of course it's 13 years that everything goes well. So for the first 13 years, the farm's doing well, they're making money, they're living, they're prospering, they're making babies, they're, you know, living their best life. In 1817, however, John is out one day in his, I think it was in his cornfields is what people were saying. Either way, he's out on the farm surveying his land, making sure that everything's going well. So he's out investigating his crops, making sure everything is all, you know, hunky-dory, nothing's going wrong, just walking around, and he claims he sees a very strange creature in his cornfields. John ends up describing this creature as a large, shaggy dog with black fur. So I'm thinking like Sirius Black status, like large shaggy black dog. Cool, I'm on board. Sirius Black! And it honestly doesn't sound that weird. I think wolves probably would have still been around in the area at this point. I'm not sure if their domain was into Tennessee, but either way, it doesn't seem too abnormal. Maybe it was just a large dog, but it gets weird. It gets weird. So John ends up saying that it's a large, shaggy dog body with the head of a rabbit. It's a little weird. I told this to my husband earlier and he said it didn't sound intimidating at all, and I have to agree with him. It really doesn't sound intimidating, but it does sound bizarre. And John thought the same thing. He was like, well, this creature is very strange. I don't really know how to feel about it or what to do about it. So John shoots at it, because why not, I guess. Do whatever, John. But John decides he doesn't understand the creature, so the best thing to do is he's gonna shoot it. Either lucky for the creature or unluckily for us, because we'll never know if this was real, because there was nothing to show for it. John apparently isn't a very good aim, and he misses the creature. He claims that it completely disappeared. He shot at it and it just disappeared. I think he was just probably crap at aim, but either way, there's no creature to show for it, and he goes about his business. He doesn't see it in the rest of his crops, so he's just assuming it's left, and there's nothing to really worry about. Like, it was a big creature, strange. I'm not gonna think about it anymore. So John finishes his work for the day, and he ends up going home that night to eat dinner with his family, as he did every night. So him and his family are sitting by their dinner table talking about whatever you talk about in 1817. I'm not really sure. But they're sitting around talking, having a good time, eating their food. And they claim that all of a sudden they started hearing what sounded like tiny pebbles being thrown at their windows. And when I first read this, I was like, that's not too strange. Like, maybe they're near a road and like pebbles are coming off of the road from like the carriages going by. But then I remembered they live on a huge like plantation. The road's not incredibly close. There is a road nearby, but it's not close enough for pebbles to be thrown into the windows from passing carriages. I discredited that theory real quick. They also claimed that not only were they starting to hear pebbles being thrown, they were hearing what sounded like chains rattling outside the windows, and there were no chains on their property, they said, so that was strange. Like, they don't know why they would hear the sounds of chains. They also claimed to hear what sounded like dogs fighting on the property, and I saw some places that said they did own dogs, but in other places that they didn't. I'm gonna assume they didn't, because otherwise I don't think that would be a very surprising noise if you just had dogs roaming your land, you know? And then they started hearing knocking on the walls, knocking on the door, and when they went to go investigate, nobody was there. There was nothing there. What's knocking? Who's knocking? Hello? So of course, there's nothing they can really do at this point. Like, they've investigated, they've seen nothing. There's nothing out there there's no one to tell to go away. There's just nothing that they can do, really. So they all get ready for bed and, you know, try to put it out of their minds, basically. So the reason I brought up the 3 youngest children is because, for the most part, it seems that the 3 youngest children are tormented the most at night, especially Betsy. Betsy makes a lot of claims over the course of the time in this story that she very much so seems targeted in some ways. So she was only 11 years old, so some of it could have been, you know, up to the imagination of an 11-year-old, but that night when they had all went to bed, the 3 youngest Bell children all claimed that they were getting pinched and slapped during the night, and that they were hearing what sounded like whispering coming from in the room with them. They described the whispers as something that they couldn't really understand what was being said, but it just sounded like a woman whispering to them all night. Not gonna lie, not my favorite detail I could have lived without ever thinking about disembodied whispers. Could you imagine sleeping at night and you just hear whispering the whole time? I'd rather not. I'd much rather never have to deal with that. Like, be quiet, I'm trying to sleep. I don't care what kind of story you have to tell me right now, please shut up. Anyways, they claimed that they were hearing whispers all night, and eventually they do claim that they start hearing other noises. Noises like what sound like rats chewing on their bed frames, chains moving from under their bed, like all kinds of weird noises. I still think the whispering is the worst. This apparently, from this night on, this happens every night, and it progressively gets more intense. Constant knocking, constant rustling of chains, constant dog barking, and the Whispering Woman. That's what they should have named her, the Whispering Woman. The haunts basically continued for a year, and the Bell family said nothing for an entire year to anyone that anything was happening in their household. I'm not sure if John was embarrassed or what. I'm assuming it's because he was pretty high standing in the community, and talking about disembodied voices and stuff kind of makes you sound crazy, especially in the early 1800s. So I'm assuming it was just because of his position in the community that he did not feel comfortable telling anyone about this. He probably felt like he needed to figure it out and handle it on his own. Or maybe John knew more than we're giving credit to him for. Who knows? I'm not exactly sure, but they apparently don't tell anyone for a year. For the most part, it seems like Betsy was targeted and John was heavily targeted with all of the hauntings and all of the whisperings. Those two seem to get the most strange stuff happening to them. But after a year of putting up with the disembodied whispers and they're progressing into not whispers anymore. They're progressing into actual full-on sentences. So letting that progress, and also just the noises at night, being tormented at night, that was way more foundation than I meant to put on my face at this moment. Oh, whoops, let's fix that. They eventually ended up telling some of their friends from church. James Johnston and his wife, Mrs. Johnston. I never saw her name anywhere. She's just Mrs. Johnston. She doesn't get a first name. They apparently told their friends from church and invited them to come stay in their house of horrors, basically turning their friends into guinea pigs to see if the same thing would happen to them. What a great bunch of friends. Those are the kind of friends you want in your life. Well, I guess you do, actually. The Johnstons seem pretty cool. The fact that they were like, yeah, we'll come sleep in your haunted house, totally fine. I guess those are the friends you want in your corner. Anyways, the Johnstons came, stayed the night, and they ended up telling the Bells in the morning, yeah, the same stuff is happening to us as well. They claimed that they were pinched all night, slapped all night, their covers were pulled off, they kept hearing someone talking in their room at night, and generally they never wanted to return. Never invite us to a dinner party, please. We would rather just not. So they ended up leaving. The Bells were really left with no other options. Like, okay, so they're not crazy. Our friends have confirmed that this is really happening, but at this point, what do we do? And it doesn't seem like they really knew what to do. There's so many claims that they were making at this point. They were saying that that original dog-like creature that John saw, the entire family was now claiming they were seeing them all over the land randomly at night. Some of the time they were saying they looked like full wolf apparitions that were like extremely large, like I'm talking probably dire wolf size. And then they were claiming sometimes they would appear and have no head. It's so bizarre. Just dogs walking around with no heads, no big deal. But it wasn't just the Bell family that was starting to see it. A lot of their slaves also claimed to be being tormented by the Bell Witch. They had a slave on the premises named Dean who also said he was getting frequently chased by these dog-like creatures on the property, to the point where he was so scared to go out sometimes that his wife ended up making him like an amulet that he wore that would ward off evil spirits to protect him, because he was being tormented so badly by the Bell Witch. So it wasn't even like just directly targeting John and Betsy. It does seem that that was the sole focus of the witch, but not the only person she enjoyed tormenting, clearly. So eventually, like I said, the haunts get worse to the point where the Bell Witch is now fully able to form sentences that are heard by people in the house. Of course, all of these events can't be verified by anyone, but there is a book that came out in the late 1800s, so like 1898 or so, 1894, 1898, way after the haunting, obviously, so like we can't be sure how accurate this is, but there is a book that came out that describes quotes that the family heard and retold of the witch. And one thing that the witch said, apparently, is really kind of ominous and freaky. So apparently one of the things that the family claimed the witch said to them was, the witch claimed to be
a spirit from everywhere, heaven, hell, the earth. I am in the air, the houses, any place, at any time. I've been created millions of years ago.
Oh, okay. Someone is omniscient and everywhere. Honestly terrifying. All of the activity is getting more and more intense over the years until almost every family member has an account of being hurt in some way, hit, talked to. Something has happened to basically every member of the family, including members of the family that were like the older children. They've moved on, gotten married. Anytime they visit, they also have claims that something happened to them in their parents' home. So it's just escalated to the point now where I feel like none of the Bell family would feel safe anymore. And it is still seeming like John is being the most prime target, to the point where they start claiming that the witch is talking about like killing John, getting rid of John. John is awful. I don't like John. So in 1821, I believe, 1820? So in December of 1820, around Christmas time, why did I only put blush on one cheek? Hang on. So around Christmas time, John had basically all of his children were in town visiting, and the morning of the 20th, the oldest son, I think was the oldest son, claimed that he was unsure why his father had not come down out of bed yet. So he went to go check on him, and as he walked into his father's bed chambers, John was already dead. He had passed away from what seemed like in his sleep. He had passed away in his sleep. But apparently, according to like multiple witnesses, and like this is written in a few things, according to multiple witnesses, as the family walked in to basically mourn the death of their father, the Bell Witch exclaimed that she had killed him and had finally basically gotten rid of John. And upon further investigation after hearing that, the oldest son found that the medicine his father was supposed to be taking had been switched out at some point for poison, which was apparently tested on a cat to see how poisonous it was. Not fine with that. But the poison apparently killed the cat instantly, so therefore proved that someone had poisoned John. We already know who did it. The Bell Witch was out there talking about how happy she was that John was dead. So it's claimed that after John died, the haunts basically chilled a little. They didn't completely stop, but they were a lot less intense and a lot less frequent, to the point where one of the oldest children claims that they heard the Bell Witch whisper to them that the Bell Witch would return in 7 years to torment the family once again. And there is account that a later member of the Bell family was living in the house 7 years later, and small things happened, but nothing too serious, so they just didn't really care about it. And eventually the house was torn down and everything, so I don't think the Bells really cared anymore. But like, that's like the rough story of the entire thing. And of course, like, I'm reading all of this, that's basically the story you see everywhere in regards to the Bell Witch, but there's no real evidence of where exactly it started, who cursed them, what was cursing them. Was it the land? Was it a person? Was John involved in stuff that he shouldn't have been? There's nothing really like too concrete when it comes to that. There is a lot of concrete evidence of things happening and like proof that like something strange was happening on that property, whether it was all made up or not. Something was happening at least. So a few theories. Let's get into those. So probably one of the most popular theories that I kept seeing was that John was being cursed by someone named Kate Batts or Kate Bates. I'm not sure how they pronounced their name. To the point where there's a lot of accounts saying that the Bell Witch was eventually named by the family Kate. I'm not sure how true that is. I couldn't find any proof in some of the older documents that that's what they called the entity in their house. I just saw they were referred to it as the witch, but it never really had a concrete name. So I think that might have been something that was later added to the story. But the name Kate comes from their neighbor, Kate Bates, Kate Batts. And apparently her and John had a pretty bad relationship due to a couple of things. The first thing was the Batts weren't as well off as the Bell family was. They financially weren't as free as they were, so at one point they ended up selling land to John, and John had money, so like of course he could buy it, but that ended up with some bad feelings in between the two families because like of course it would kind of suck to like see your neighbor on your land that you can't afford anymore. It would not feel good, you know? And then apparently I did see claims that Kate was the one that dealt with this exchange, but I don't think it was true. I think her husband did. So her husband does end up dying at some point, and she ends up running the estate and everything by herself, which for the time is unheard of. So I think that's why Kate gets such a bad rap, because she was an independent woman in a time where women weren't allowed to be independent. So I think that's why a lot of these rumors have come up about Kate. But from what I saw, Kate's husband and John had a slave exchange, basically, for a young slave girl. John claims that he purchased her and was not able to take her because Mr. Batts decided that he wanted her to stay with them for just a little while longer. I'm not sure exactly on the claim I saw on the church's like lineup. They said it was just a few days. I've seen other claims saying it was a few years. I'm gonna go with the church's documentation for this, and it said it was just a few days. So John bought this young slave girl, and Mr. Batts wanted to keep her on his property for just a few days, and then John could come pick her up. That's what it seems like the exchange was supposed to be. What ended up happening was Mr. Batts decided that after a few days, she was now worth more money and wanted more money from John. And that didn't go well, so John just took her anyways. And as you can imagine, Mr. Batts was not happy about it. So I'm not sure exactly what the true story was with that. Some people say that Kate was the one that facilitated that exchange, and some people say it wasn't. I think it was her husband. But I think it's just still created more bad blood between the two families in regard to it. And it just makes John seem even more squirrely to me than he already kind of seems. Like I have a lot of issues with John. He ends up getting excommunicated from the church because of this. So it definitely makes me think there's more to that story than what I can find. And that everyone thought he was a shady businessman anyways, and probably as well respected as I thought he was in the beginning, it seems like he does lose some credibility. Now, some people do think he lost credibility because of the haunting, and of course, like during the time period, a lot of people don't want to associate with that kind of haunting, I guess, or that kind of bad juju at the time. So there's mixed opinions on whether or not he got excommunicated because of a bad sale or because of the haunting already happening. But a huge theory is that Kate was involved, and because Kate, again, was an independent woman, that clearly means she was a witch. So a lot of people think Kate was the one that was haunting them, but there's a lot of contradictory information. Like some people say that even on her deathbed, she was saying that she would take out revenge on John, but John died before her, so that just doesn't make any sense. She doesn't die for many years after John, so that doesn't seem right. Another theory that people have is that there were Native American burial grounds on the land, and it's kind of like all of the ones with like the Skinwalker Ranch out west. It depends on what you believe, I guess, as far as like hauntings, but they claim that there's a lot of Native American burial grounds located on the property and that's what was going on. But for the most part, it doesn't seem like anyone really knows. The most interesting thing that I learned during this whole thing though was that in like 1818 or 1817, Andrew Jackson decided he was gonna go and investigate the Bell family. I mean, he wasn't president yet at this point, he was just a general, and he's from Tennessee as well. So it was interesting that he decided to go pay a visit to the Bell house because he was hearing things. Apparently the two eldest Bell boys had served under him, so he knew the Bell family and he wanted to go check it out. And apparently he pulled up with a bunch of men in his carriages and they got stuck. Their horses were like, we're not going up there. So that story is well accounted for. I just find it very interesting because like, of course he ends up becoming president later on and he decided to be a little paranormal investigator for the day. I just thought that was kind of funny. Strange times, man. But overall, you guys, that is the entire story of the Bell Witch. We aren't really sure of what her origin is or like where she came from, why she decided to show up then. We don't know what these giant, weird, dog-like creatures are. Maybe it's tied to some folklore I didn't run across in any research, but it's very interesting to me and super spooky. Could you imagine laying in your bed and hearing like taps on your window and like whispers all around you? Never sleep again. That is the entire story of the Bell Witch. If you have any other information that I left out of today's story, because there was a lot, I couldn't include everything, let us know down in the comments any other interesting tidbits that you know, if you know any. Also let me know of any other spooky stories that you would like me to talk about down in the comments. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up down below. Also make sure to hit the subscribe button so you're here for next week's spooky story. And I hope you all are having a good day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!